I believe a lot of the issues I campaigned on were not just unique to one neighborhood or to one district. I believe the issues of homelessness, public safety, and housing cover every corner of Seattle. And so I'm really excited to see what has been working and being able to expand that to the entire city.
Well, that's your newly appointed Seattle City Council Position 8 council member, Tanya Wu, talking about her just came up short run for the District 2 seat back in November and how that prepared her for a citywide seat. But there are some more tough questions ahead for her, including how she will react to a plan for Mayor Bruce Harrell to put a freeze on hiring for the city of Seattle with a major budget gap looming. Plus, what is our state doing in the fight against fentanyl, and what can we learn from what's been happening in the state of Oregon? And finally, how much should the city of Seattle pay for a streetcar project that's kind of gone off the rails in more ways than one? Well, we have these stories and a lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and I'm joined by my effervescent co-host, David Croman of the Seattle Times. And David, I know you're back on the beat at City Hall, getting back into the swing of things. Did you ever find that vending machine you were looking for at City Hall? What's the update?
I did, yeah. It's on one of the lower, I think you know well, it's outside of the Seattle channel. But I noticed it used to take cards. It looks like it doesn't take cards anymore. So
a lot of problem with the cards, and that thing's a dollar eater too. Sometimes I'm really itching for that Diet Coke, and it just doesn't work out. That's a major problem. I guess we could talk about that more on the show at another point. But David, thank you as always for being with me here. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor on the first floor of City Hall. That's City Grind Espresso. Good to have them with us. And thanks also to our show patrons. A shout out to Jimmy this week. Thanks for engaging with me on Patreon, Jimmy. Really appreciate that. Some good questions I'm going to be talking about on the Seattle channel with some of our new council members. We do need our patrons, folks, and here's the deal. For just $5 a month, you can not only support the show, but access Patrons First podcast, where I'm talking to local lawmakers, other major newsmakers. Patrons, thank you for keeping this show rolling. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get going. Time for Right Here, Right Now. David, we were there together in council chambers this week, awaiting the selection of Tanya Wu as the person to replace outgoing councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, who's now on the King County Council. It felt a little anticlimactic to me after the story we talked about last week. Business leaders kind of getting behind the scenes, consultant Tim Cease pushing to get Tanya Wu in office. But after some long speeches and thanks to the 8 finalists for the position here, a lot of that going on, Tanya Wu was selected with 5 votes in the very first round of voting. I guess if you thought the city council was turning a bit more moderate, there's no question about that now, is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of, it's almost too clear. For one, it's Teresa Mosqueda being swapped for Tanya Wu. I mean, it's
right.
Maybe not quite, Ruth Bader Ginsburg being swapped for, a conservative judge, but it has a little bit of that air of a new council appointing somebody clearly in their mold and not in Teresa Mosqueda's mold. And then, I just think the image of somebody who was on the campaign trail fairly squarely aligned with a lot of the new members of the council, but unlike those members lost, now being instated to join them, it couldn't kind of be any more clear that this is them solidifying what was already a majority into something like a supermajority.
Right. And I guess I should point out this vote for Tanya Wu was not unanimous. Council members Hollingsworth, Strauss, and Morales choosing other candidates here. Do you think that means anything long-term? Are Strauss, Hollingsworth possible allies, or Councilmember Morales, who clearly felt disrespected in this process with 2 of her former opponents who were up for this position? What do you think of that group of 3 that I just talked about there?
Yeah, I think it's a little early. Dan Strauss will be interesting to watch because he, I don't think anyone would argue he was the most front and center council member for the last 2 years. Yeah. But now, he's in a powerful position as leading the budget, and he's got a little more experience. So, it'll be kind of interesting to see how he handles being probably a little more powerful of a council member. And then, Joy Hollingsworth, I don't think she was sort of lumped in quite as cleanly with the rest of the people on the campaign trail, at least as far as I could tell. I think she seems to have maybe a little more, some progressive leanings, and as we saw yesterday, a little bit more of an independent streak. So, I mean, Councilmember Morales, it's fairly clear she's a bit on an island, but towards the end of her last term, had shifted a lot of her focus toward things like Vision Zero and pedestrian safety, and that's an issue that I'm sure she can find common ground with some of her new colleagues on.
Yeah, and Councilmember Morales being the land use chair, it's going to be interesting to see how she guides that group too. So, just quickly on Councilmember Morales, she said a few things from the podium there, saying, "Hey, look at what's going on here. This feels like a foregone conclusion." What is her role now on the council? Is she just sort of a voice crying out in the wilderness? How do you look at that for Councilmember Morales?
Yeah, I mean, I thought yesterday was sort of interesting. Actually, she used the pulpit a bit to say, look what's happening here. Business is hand choosing this candidate. And, use this. I don't remember her exact wording was basically like, use this as a catalyst to get involved. And so,
think about this at the polls, that kind of a thing.
So that was interesting. I thought that was a bit of an acknowledgement that policy wise, she is going to be a lot more isolated. But without Shama Sawant being on council, if she wants to be the kind of rallier, I suppose, of the left, she could be that. And I thought yesterday was the first sign that maybe she actually it's a job that she's interested in. That if she can't pass policy, maybe she can kind of raise a little hell, I suppose. Yeah. Is she going to raise as much hell as Councilmember Sawant? I doubt it, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah. She definitely wants to separate herself in many ways. I did want to move on to another piece here, a story that you actually wrote for the Times as well in working on this. And I guess one of the key issues Tanya Wu and her fellow council members will have to tackle this year, a budget gap, somewhere around $229 million. So on the campaign trail last November, we all remember, Tanya Wu, just about all the candidates who ended up winning, talked about auditing the budget, making cuts. Well, looks like the mayor's kind of set the table for them, a hiring freeze plan released earlier this week. And you wrote about this, David, and said the mayor wants to freeze hiring for all departments except police, fire, the new alternative response team. And you also pointed out, I thought this was very interesting too, the mayor is asking all city departments to review the scope of any projects over $1 million that they have up for bid. Interesting because in a city with a budget of $7.8 billion, that's billion with a B, $1 million works out to, I did the math here, it's 1/10,000th of the budget. Think about a one with 3 zeros to the left of it there. I wanted to take a look at that, and I thought you were interested in it too. What do you think the mayor is saying here? Yeah, I mean, I think this is, that's not to say that all of these contracts are going to be paused or anything like that, but they talk about auditing the budget. I suppose this is a way to do it, which is to look at the scope of the contracts that are out there. I think what this could be is a lot of cutting back maybe on consultant contracts, if that's where it ends up going. And I don't know how far that gets you toward closing that gap, but it is, I think when departments or whatever have budget crunches, kind of reviewing consultant contracts is oftentimes the first step they take. And so I think that is probably what this is. It sounds like this is not capital projects. So like big transportation projects, those aren't necessarily going to be paused or anything. But, RFPs for, marketing budget, outside marketing firm or something like that might get a look and if not canceled, maybe pared down. Again, it's a pretty big delta that I don't think will be closed by looking at consultant contracts, but it is sort of a early signal from the mayor of how he wants to approach this. Yeah, I'm really interested to see where this goes and really where the whole conversation about alternative revenue goes, because the mayor's definitely said he'd consider bringing in some new revenue. And remember, there's been this alternative revenue task force working at this for the past few years. That whole idea about any new taxes is definitely not the message that we're hearing from these newly elected council members. Do you have an idea about this, David, where this conversation about new revenue, where it's going to go? Does it go anywhere with this new council? What do you think? I think that they will go through a process of looking for cuts. Maybe those exist. $229 million this year and more next year. That's a lot of money. Yeah. And I don't know if pure cuts could get them there. Maybe it can. If it can't, then you're sort of. Then I think that the question is, going to be, do they bring in new revenue, or do they take something like, for example, the jumpstart tax or
on big businesses, right?
Sweet and beverage tax or something that is sort of theoretically committed to a specific purpose, but unlike, say, public utilities or something, isn't actually legally mandated to do that thing.
Right.
So they could take something like Jumpstart, which theoretically is supposed to go to permanent supportive housing or just affordable housing generally, and they could, put all that money and close the budget deficit. And by the way, the amount that comes in from Jumpstart is about equal to the budget deficit. So I guess I would be surprised if this new council ever took a vote to increase some kind of tax or bring in new revenue. I think before that they would move money around, much to the chagrin of the people who depend on and look to this money to, develop, say, affordable housing or something like that.
Yeah, so interesting. And just kind of put it in perspective, I mean, there's this pushback on considering new revenue, but think about when the Jumpstart tax went into effect just a few years ago, new revenue, and imagine if we didn't have Jumpstart right now, the kind of budget hole that Seattle would be in. This is an interesting discussion. I think I'm interested to see how this council positions itself and what this is all about, because I guess the other piece here, Dan Strauss, the chair of that budget department, he definitely had support from business, but he had support from labor too. So I'm interested to see where this all evens out for the council, I guess, going forward. All right, well, more on that to come, that's for sure. In the weeks ahead, we're actually going to have some committee meetings coming soon. Looking forward to that from these council members. But I wanted to talk about something at the state level with you, David. The state legislature working on some laws right now to fight a fentanyl epidemic that simply is not letting up. We're going to talk about what the state of Washington is doing and what lessons might be learned from the state of Oregon, too. Find out coming up on Now Hear This. So we've been working to look at some new issues from the state legislature each week in this short session here. And the one that won't go away is an attempt to change the trajectory of our state's and our nation's deadly fentanyl crisis. Washington had the highest year-to-year increase in the U.S. last year when it comes to drug overdose deaths, with much of that fueled by opioids like fentanyl. The crisis led members of several Washington tribes and some state lawmakers to call for action from the state earlier this week in Olympia.
We are standing here today demanding that we collaborate, that we work together to heal one Washington. The opioid and fentanyl crisis, a dark undercurrent threatening the fabric in society, requires us to stand united and say, "You're not alone."
That's State Representative Deborah Lekanoff from the 40th District up in the Bow area, close to Anacortes there, a tribal member and advocate for many years. She is working on a number of measures to get more help for tribes in our state, which have been hit especially hard by opioids. She called for a state of emergency from the governor to get funds distributed more quickly. As the Times reports, it doesn't appear the governor is going to do that declaration there. He says the legislature is the right place for action to happen. They decide where to put the state's resources, after all. And David, this almost reminds me of Seattle and King County declaring a state of emergency on homelessness back in 2015. I just wanted to get into this with you. What impact would declaring a state of emergency on fentanyl really have? Do you have a thought about that?
I suppose it could open up some federal avenues, maybe cut some red tape around citing of, I don't think this is where this is headed, but theoretically you could cite for treatment centers,
sure,
and sort of step around some of the typical zoning or discussions or things like that. I don't know where this would go. It seems like a lot of times states of emergency are more about the message they send than the practical impact. As we saw, though, with the state of emergency on homelessness, if it exists too long and people perceive that you haven't done enough, then I think it can backfire a bit, which is you've acknowledged, then the view becomes you've acknowledged that this is a big problem and still have not fixed it. So it's a sensitive line to walk. I don't know what it leads to exactly.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring that up with you because I know the state's working on this, but just the manner with which it does it and this whole idea of a state of emergency doesn't seem like the tool, at least, the state's looking at now. I should point out that Governor Jay Inslee has proposed adding $64 million to address the fentanyl crisis here, including some expanded access to overdose reversal medication like naloxone. So we'll see what happens there. Republicans with a big press conference on Wednesday down in Olympia talking about cracking down on this too. And I did want to bring that up about cracking down, quote unquote, on this crisis, because I've been very interested to see how this is playing out in other states like Oregon, just to the south of us. And some background here, folks, if you forgot about it. Oregon voters passed Measure 110 in 2020. This decriminalized possession of small amounts of any illicit drug, including fentanyl here, and it put more funding toward drug treatment. Now the legislature in Oregon wants to recriminalize possession, make it a misdemeanor, possible 30 days in jail. They say their current system is not working. I know we saw our state wrestle with this, David. We saw the city of Seattle wrestle with this last year. After a lot of hand-wringing, Seattle finally has a misdemeanor on the books. Talk to me about how you think this struggle Oregon is going through is maybe informing what our state is doing when it comes to, yes, treating addiction, but also attaching some criminal penalties to fentanyl use.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pendulum swing for sure.
Yeah,
I
feels
think
like it.
The issue has just become so overwhelming that, in some ways, a lot of the discussions around drug decriminalization were sort of unfolding in an environment, in sort of frankly, a heroin environment.
Okay.
Which is, a drug that is intense and deadly, but perhaps more treatable than fentanyl. And I think what cities and states are experiencing now is just being so overwhelmed by fentanyl and sort of unclear how to address it. That I don't know that criminalization is going to make some big difference, but I think it's a feeling that maybe states and cities should not be as quick to take certain options off the table, like jail. And there is an argument, and it's hard to know if it's hard to know anything about any of this, but there's an argument that jail is one front door toward treatment. Yeah. And so that's a big debate to be had. And so I think people see it so much, it's so overwhelming, that I think more people are increasingly willing to entertain the idea that jail might be an avenue toward treatment.
Right. And when you consider that the biggest part of the budget, most often for a lot of cities, does go towards law enforcement, I mean, that's where we're putting resources around our state here. And I think taking that off the table, as you say, is something that cities are considering here. I know people don't lock up people and think that that's going to actually solve the problem of addiction. But I think you're really right. The other difference that I really see, David, is fentanyl is so much of a cheaper drug than heroin. It's something that can be obtained for less than $1 a pill on the downtown streets of Seattle. So it just seems like a much more prevalent crisis, and one that I know it's kind of like we have to do something, and we've got some police on the street, so let's work after it that way. Maybe that's the logic here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's just it's so much faster moving that changes hands more quickly. It's cheaper. It's easier to get. It can be taken in pill form. I think all of that combined, and it's just so much more powerful. And my sense is it doesn't last as long. I think all that combined makes it, a difficult job of reaching people who are struggling with addiction even more difficult. And so again, right, I don't have an answer whether this is right or wrong or not, but criminalization to an extent does put those people in an interaction with some sort of system. You might think it's the wrong system, but it is a system that they're interacting with.
Gosh, it's such a convoluted and complicated issue, and I appreciate you wrestling with that, because I know our state lawmakers are doing that, and certainly Oregon is feeling the effects of what's happening or not happening with Measure 110 here 4 years later. I did want to talk about a somber anniversary, I suppose, this week. Roe versus Wade on January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court made the decision to declare a nationwide constitutional right to abortion. That decision, of course, overturned by the Supreme Court in the 2022 Dobbs case. But some states independently support abortion rights, like Washington. Shout out to Axios on this one, bringing us this story from Senator Maria Cantwell's office. The senator, looking at Planned Parenthood data, points out that since that Dobbs decision, the number of out-of-state abortion patients in the state of Washington is up 36%, mainly coming from Idaho, which has a strict abortion ban in place. It's prohibited even during medical emergencies. The Kennewick Planned Parenthood Clinic, for example, had 2 patients from Idaho in the first half of 2022, had 91 in the first half of 2023. David, I'm seeing 2 big issues here. 1, definitely a strain on our health system. And 2, it almost seems like doctors in states with even a partial abortion ban are really scared of getting litigated here. What do you make of this influx of women seeking abortions?
I mean, it's predictable to an extent.
Expected in some ways.
Was expected. I think there is a feeling of it being before and after Roe. My sense is some of this was happening already, because it's not like states like Idaho were making it easy for people to get abortions. But yeah, I mean, I think the next frontier in this is that kind of legislating cross-state travel, who accompanies whom, whether, frankly, this is the extreme step, but whether, states could extradite doctors or anything like that. Again, all this stuff sounds maybe a few steps down the road, but it's not, it's not impossible that some of this stuff could happen. I mean, that said, that it's been fairly clear that I do think there's starting to be a little bit of a shift. Maybe this is too political prognostication. An acknowledgement that it's not a good political issue for Republicans in particular. And I think we started to see some people on the right talk about, we need sensible limits rather than full-on bans.
Right.
That's not to say, though, that certain corners don't support full-on bans and, could build campaigns on, Idaho, for example, is an extremely conservative state. I could see people running campaigns on sort of taking this to the next punitive step.
Right. And I mean, Idaho is one of the states that actually has a bounty program there. If you report somebody who's going out of state for an abortion, you can actually get some money for that. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And that's a very good point you're making about how this plays as an election issue. Axios also reported that just about every time abortion rights have been on the ballot since the Dobbs decision, those abortion rights have won out. There are 2 measures on the ballot this year in Arizona and Nevada. But I think that's the other part of this, too. Just the kind of patchwork nature of these laws makes a real nationwide challenge here that the states are fighting with each other, it feels like.
Yeah, which is ironic because of this. Yeah, the ruling was supposed to, get this out of the courts.
As it were.
And in fact, it seems like it's opened up a whole new avenue or, a whole new trap of court cases and litigation. And, you think of the Supreme Court as a body existing to reduce these kinds of interstate conflicts. And in fact, the most recent, regardless of what you think of abortion, it's fairly clear that the most recent ruling did the opposite of that. It created the opportunity for almost infinite incarnations of interstate conflict.
Yeah, it really is looking like that. David, thank you for your insight there. And I wanted to move on to another story here, putting our focus back on the city of Seattle and a streetcar project that just got a lot more expensive. That's coming up on What's Next. David, I wanted to talk about another story you reported on, the Seattle streetcar project. This connector to link up the city's 2 streetcar lines got a new cost estimate, $410 million. That's up from $286 million in 2019 and more than triple what this project was originally supposed to cost. I know Greg Spotts, the DOT director, he has called this project a cultural connector, said it's going to boost ridership across the system if you bring these 2 lines together. But this price tag, that's what I keep tripping on here. Do you think this project will survive this kind of frosty-looking budget process the city has ahead? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know. I've tried actually to get a clear answer on is this project dead or not, and no one has ever given me that answer. And I could see that continuing to be the case. It's popular enough that no one quite wants to come out and say this thing's dead, we're not doing this. But I don't think it's so popular that there's enough of a political constituency to really fight for it and push it across the line. I know Mayor Harrell really likes the idea, and he sees it as being important to downtown recovery. There's not the Downtown Seattle Association likes it, but that's not a unanimous feeling among even downtown business owners. And there's certainly some queasiness about a major construction project through First Avenue as things are sort of starting to come back to normal.
Yeah.
So, for me, the question is just who is going to be the person? Because if this is going to happen, somebody has to really put their neck out for it and push really hard. I don't know who that person is. Even some transportation advocacy groups that theoretically support it just have their hands full with too many other things at the state level or the transportation levy. And the transportation levy, I don't think is going to cover the cost here. So, I'm willing to be convinced that it's possible. Right now, I don't see what that path is.
Well, it's interesting to me, too, when you talk about the businesses that potentially support this. I think about all these new council members that just came on board, including Rob Saka, who's our new transportation chair on the city council there. And you think about that, okay, these businesses might like the idea of having this connection and helping out their businesses downtown, which it could potentially do. But also, would they support the idea of new taxes to try to make something like this work? And I know that's something that was definitely not on the list for these new candidates coming in. It's almost like those two priorities are playing against each other a little bit. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. More than that, though, I just, Rob Saka in particular, he's the chair of the Transportation Committee.
Right.
He likes calling himself the pothole king.
Right. He's on potholes first. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, I talked to him a few weeks back, and he said his hope for this next levy is that it does things like potholes, that it does things like bridge maintenance. Mm-hmm. He said he's willing to spend more on new sidewalks, but other than that, I would be surprised if this levy has a focus on new things, and the streetcar is very much a new thing. I do think that's probably why this council was elected, was people want their streets to not be as bumpy. And, that shows up in polling that people want, basics in the transportation system taken care of. I also think most people would probably prefer to spend that level of money on more reliable bus service at Metro or more bus stop. People have their commutes and that they're used to, and those commutes are not working very well for a lot of people. And so again, back to the question of who's going to be the group that fights really hard for this. I don't know who that is, because I think most people, given the option, would love to see $410 million spent on more buses, or making Denny more, for example, giving it a better bus lane to move the 8 faster or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's not to say it doesn't have any support. It's just to say that as far as priorities go, it's fairly low, I think, in a time when the city hall is already going to have to make some decisions around what they move forward on, what they leave behind.
Yeah, I know. And each time they study it, the cost keeps going up. So, that's a big part of the consideration, too. All right, time to wrap up here, David. I saw that you posted recently about 3 Mariners pitchers, Castillo, Gilbert, Kirby, being in the top 10 as far as the betting world is concerned to win the Cy Young this year in the American League. What do you think the odds are that one of those guys actually takes home the hardware this season?
I think okay. I mean, that's interestingly, I think I'd put my money on Kirby this year.
Yeah.
I think Castillo is generally seen as the favorite, but I saw a couple things in him that made me a little concerned, whereas Kirby just has the look of somebody who could easily become the best pitcher in the world. So I put my money on Kirby.
Something about staring that guy in the face, man. He's got a mean old look there. And having 3 of those guys on one team, that's really something else too. So we'll see what happens there. Again, David, I always like talking a little bit of baseball with you because it's the most important sport out there. I mean, let's really get down to it. David, thank you again. And thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Show your support there. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. And we will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.